Welcome to the Australian Hiker podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1.3 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 353 of the Australian Hiker podcast, brought to you by Australian Hiker, we're going to talk about the Heysen Trail, expectations. In my case, this is a trail I've been trying to do for the last 5 years, and for one reason or another, I've just never been able to get there. I love two key things about hiking, coastal hiking and arid hiking, and this trail has both. So I look forward to bringing you these series of podcasts, and hopefully this might encourage you to do at least a section of it, if not the whole trail. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by sharing this podcast with your hiking friends and encouraging them to listen to it. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the support us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. As this podcast goes to air, I'm just 8 days out from starting my journey on the South Australian Heysen Trail. In this episode, I talk about trip planning and discuss my pre-trip expectations, hesitations and concerns. This is the second of a series of podcasts I'll be recording on my trip, with the expectation that I will be somewhere in total of 10 to 11 episodes. So this is the second episode I've done so far. I expect to have 7 to 8 on-trail episodes released once a week, and then a final episode at the end to give a total of 10 or 11. Hopefully this will give you a good indication of what this track is like and whether it's something that you might consider wanting to do. So why this trail? I must admit, when I started Australian Hiker in 2016, we did so releasing our first series of podcasts on the Larapinta Trail. And at that stage, the 230-ish kilometre track was the longest track that I had ever done. That just enthused me to look at doing long-distance trails, both overseas and in Australia. And one of the things that I wanted to go through and do is do what's classed as the Australian Triple Crown. So the Bibbulmun Track, the Heysen Trail and the Australian Alps Walking Track. In 2018, I did the Bibbulmun Track, and in 2021, I had intended on doing the Heysen Trail, but the track was actually closed due to COVID and didn't reopen until 2 days before I was due to start. So I pulled the pin and did something else. Even having said that, both the Heysen and my other option, which was the Tasmanian Trail, were both closed throughout the trail. So ended up not being able to complete either, regardless of which one I had picked.
I can't believe that we're still blaming COVID for everything.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
And then you wanted to do the Australian Alps Walking Track, but a little thing called a hip started to get in the way of that one. And so that wasn't possible either, was it?
And also the bushfires are a major issue.
That's true, yeah. It's
one of these things that I do actually plan on doing the Australian Alps Walking Track next year, 2027. But we'll see what happens this summer and see if there's any bushfires or major problems that impact on that track. Now, the Heysen for me is one of those sort of tracks that I am been looking forward to for quite a while, and that's for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I love arid hiking. So the Larapinta Trail, which was the first long-distance track that I'd done, really resonated with me. And this track, which is 1,200 kilometres long, is not all arid, but certainly the northern end, around the northern trailhead at Paranchilna, is one of those areas. It's the southern Flinders Ranges, and it is an arid area. So I definitely am looking forward to that. There is also some coastal components of this track, but the last few days or last couple of days of this track will be spent walking along to the southern trailhead, expecting to get to Cape Jervis and finishing off there. So walking up on the cliff lines in through the coastal heathlands, looking out towards the Southern Ocean. So really this track ticks all my boxes in relation to that. And in the middle, lots of farmland, lots of management road walking, walking close by or through the Barossa Valley. So if I'm feeling enthusiastic, I can stop off and do some wine tasting. I'll see how that goes. So yeah, there's a lot to see and a lot that I'm liking the look of.
Well, it's certainly a long distance, so you'd want to be able to see a lot of different things in that distance.
Normally when I go through and do a track, it's not unusual. I do actually acknowledge the Indigenous countries that I'm walking through, and typically it's like the Great Southwest Walk, which I did earlier this year. I expected to. I was only walking through one Indigenous country, whereas in this case, because of the distance, I'm going through several Indigenous areas, and I will acknowledge that for each episode as I go through.
Is there anything in particular that you need to do on your way into those areas? So do you need to let local communities know?
If you listen to last week's episode, roughly 2/3 of this track is through private land. And in the case of walking through Indigenous land where the track is, as long as you're not wandering off trail and going in the middle of nowhere, you're fine. So stay on trail and you won't have an issue. But it's more just about acknowledging the traditional owners and having a look and seeing what's there as we go, both in relation to natural and cultural aspects. And for that matter, historic aspects as well, because there's a number of huts that I'll be staying in, which are old farming huts that have been in there for quite a while, even before the track went into play. This track can be walked through probably the cooler months of the year is the best way to describe it. Because there is a lot of private land involved, once you get into a high fire danger situation, a lot of those areas close. So while you can do some components of this track year-round, you can't do the entire track, and you certainly don't really want to either. When it's midsummer and it's getting up in the 40s, 40 degrees Celsius, I don't think you really want to be doing this track anyway.
Yeah, it's a pretty harsh environment and, pretty extreme weather conditions at those times of the year as well. So, yeah, you wouldn't want to, would you really?
No. Realistically, probably around about mid-May to mid-October is the hiking season, and it will vary from year to year. If it's an exceptionally bad start to summer, it could even be sort of earlier than that, or if it's a really bad finish to summertime and into autumn and a lot of fires around, that could also be later as well. But really from about mid-May through to about mid-October really is the hiking season. South Australia in general tends to have a Mediterranean climate, and that means that they have most of their rainfall in wintertime, and that's exactly when I'm going to be hiking. And I must admit, I don't have a real issue with that. If it's going to rain, that's fine. The other plus of that is the temperatures aren't going to be excessive. So I'm looking overall minimum temperatures around about 4 degrees at night time and around about a maximum of 21, potentially up to about 25 as I get towards the end of the hike in the south. So not overly hot. I don't like it when it gets above 25 degrees. It really just sucks the life out of me as far as hiking is concerned.
So as you're talking now, I'm picturing that video on the Bibbulmun track at the very, very beginning where it was a huge storm and you're sitting there wondering whether or not you'll ever be able to get started. And so you're saying you're fine with the rain, and I'm just thinking, oh, here we go again.
Yeah. And I'll talk a bit more about the rain and the impacts of the rain a bit later on. Transport-wise, to get to the trailhead, I'm based in Canberra. I've got a flight down to Adelaide on the Tuesday morning. I've got a few hours wait in Adelaide, and then I pick up the State Liner bus, which is the government bus system, and I pick that up around in the afternoon, and I'll get to Port Augusta around about 5:30 in the afternoon. From there, I will have overnight in Port Augusta, and I've never been to Port Augusta, so it gives me the morning to wander around and have a look at the town and see what's there, because I've never actually been there, and it's one of those sort of places that's not really a destination for the things that I do. So good opportunity to have a look around. Then on the Wednesday, which is the day I start my walk, then on the Wednesday afternoon at just after lunch, I've got a private shuttle going from Port Augusta up to the Northern Trailhead, which is about a 2-hour trip. And that gets me there at around about 3:30 in the afternoon. The end of the track, when I get to Cape Jervis, Jill's offered to come down and meet me and take me back to Canberra.
Yep, so I can stand at the end with a sign and cheer and take that video of you looking like an absolute disaster.
Now, accommodation-wise, accommodation is going to be a few different things. There's going to be some campsites, and that'll be scattered throughout the actual trip itself, and that's probably the majority of where I'm going to be staying. There'll be caravan parks throughout the trip itself, and there's also going to be huts, and these are old, look like old farming properties, and they are able to be slept inside. So whereas if you think about through the Alpine National Parks, they're for emergency use only, these shelters are for use. So so long as there's not bucket loads of people there and I get there early enough, I should be able to get an indoor space without having to worry about setting up the tent at the end of the day. So a good combination as we go. One comment I would make on the accommodation, and I've been looking at it today because I do need to look at booking at least my first accommodation, which is at Wilpena. It's not cheap accommodation. So even an unpowered campsite is $90 for 2 nights. So that's expensive as an unpowered campsite is concerned. But this is a private accommodation inside a national park. And basically it means you're going to have to go through and pay whatever the going rate is because you're not supposed to camp in the middle of nowhere. So this is where it comes back to I probably will be spending a bit more on accommodation than I would do on a number of hikes that I've done in the past. Accommodation-wise also, I'm not going to be booking everything in advance because I just don't know if I'm going to be running ahead or behind. So I definitely know that I will get to the accommodation at Wilpena at my chosen time. But from there, really what I'll need to do is before I leave that accommodation, I'll then book the next accommodation, giving me a good indication of how I'm travelling. The track itself is advertised as 1,200 kilometres. And when I talked to Neil Hendry in the previous episode, the president of the Friends of the Heysen Trail, he said the trail is roughly between 1,100 and 1,200 kilometres because really that depends on if you're doing any side trips. And he's suggested I do at least one side trip to go up a summit to get some great views. And it also depends on whether there's any detours in place. And that's going to depend on whether there's, and there is a detour that was put into place where they're constructing a new wind farm, but that's resulted in them bringing out a new map with new directions on it. So I noticed when I bought the map set, there were 2 new maps that were totally different from the previous ones I'd bought 5 years ago. I'm using the Far Out app to go through and talk about navigation, and I'll talk more specifically about that later on. But they actually say that the trail is 1,074 kilometres. Now, I'm sure that's probably the case, but by the time I get there, do any little offshoots and detours, it'll be interesting to see what it does actually pan out at by the end of the trip. My longest day on trail is 34 kilometres, and that's day 11. My shortest day on trail is day 1, and that's when I get the bus from Port Augusta and I walk 500 metres into the hikers' campground. Given that I get there at about 3:30, by the time I get myself back on my shoulder and do some social media, I probably won't start walking till 4. Given I got 500 metres, I'll be there at the campsite well and truly before 4:30.
And the reason that you're doing that is because the next one on is a bit too far.
And I've been watching the Heysen Trail social media, and there was someone who just who just left about a week ago. They got there and then did the 18 kilometres to the second campsite, but that means that she was night hiking. Now, I do plan on doing some night hiking, and where that will be will depend on when the full moon is and the time of the day and the dates. That's what I tend to aim for. So I won't know that until I'll play that by ear, sort of a few days in advance and see what I'm going through and doing. But yeah, I didn't want to spend, given if I leave at 4 o'clock and do 4 kilometres an hour, it means potentially I won't get into the campsite till 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'd rather take and have a nice, easy sort of day, do the 500 metres in, get set up, and I can leave early the next day rather than trying to, or for the sake of picking up that second campsite for no particular reason.
Yeah, yeah.
I have 60 days on this trip, and that's what that means is I'll come into town. So as an example, Wilpena Pound, I will get there sometime mid-afternoon. I'll stay there overnight, and rather than heading off the next day, I need to go through and do up a podcast. So put my podcast together, edit it, get it published, and do some social media while I've got the opportunity, hopefully, to have some internet access. Now, internet access is going to be interesting. I've got good 4G access on most of the trail. 5G is a bit erratic, and I may not be able to publish my first podcast until probably about 14 days in. That's when I start picking up decent internet access. So it's going to be a bit of a play it by ear. So normally that means that I'll arrive in at camp sometime in the afternoon in most cases, sleep there overnight, have the next day to do social media, pick up any food drops that I need to pick up, and that will be where I pick up additional food. And then when the next morning I'll head off to the walking along the track further again. So 6 days rest or 0 days, and then I have an average of around about 23.4 kilometres per day on the days that I will be walking. So again, there's a couple of days under 20 kilometres. I think the smallest day is 10 kilometres. And that's a day that I may actually combine with 2 days together. And I think if I do that, it gives me a 27-kilometre day. But I will play it by ear.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the thing about, this is a pretty long distance and in anybody's book. And so you do need to have a bit of flexibility. You definitely need to have rest days. I think calling them 0 days is probably, I'm not sure where that comes from, Tim, but it's actually a rest day.
Yeah. Now, apart from doing the social media, it gives me a chance to wash my clothes. I do
After 1,200 kilometres, I hope so. I hope there's a bit of washing happening in there.
Wash my clothes, have a shave, pick up my food, as I said, and get caught up on social media and other things as well, because given that I'm taking 7 to 8 weeks, so 52 days is the plan for this trip, I've got social media to manage for the blog itself, and that's going to be the catch-up day there as well. So it will be a work day for me. I just won't be walking. Now, facilities-wise on this trail, as I said, when I'm staying in a caravan park, different situation. There's showers, there's toilets. Quite often they're bigger caravan parks, so there's often shops and little cafes and restaurants in a lot of them. So that's not going to be an issue. It's the actual campsites themselves, and the campsites generally have water, although sometimes the water is further on from the actual campsite itself. Some of them have toilets, some don't, and it really is going to depend on what is there. So we'll come prepared with shovel and toilet paper, but it's the sort of thing that this is a natural trail, and looking at the photos and videos I've seen of other people doing these hikes, there is a lot of management road. You are walking through farms, and talking to Neil Hendry in last week's episode, there's something like 300 stiles going over fences. So I'm feeling enthusiastic about doing a video slideshow of all the stiles on trail. So I'm going to have to remember to take 300 odd photos of stiles just to see what they're like.
Man, that's a lot of stiles.
It is. Scenery-wise, again, looking at the photos from the last 2 or 3 weeks, they've had a lot of rain. And as a result, the environment is a lot greener than I would have expected. Now, they're showing flooding creek beds, and now that's a subjective thing. It means you've got 3 inches of water across the creek. But
you be careful. Be careful, Tim.
I know.
Don't speak too soon.
But looking at the actual scenery from the bottom of the Flinders Ranges, it's very green and lush.
Lush, yeah,
so,
definitely.
Now, whether that's still the case in another 8 days, I don't know. But I'm expecting it to be greener and lusher than in a typical sort of year. Animal-wise, Neil said a lot of the animals tend to be nocturnal. So I expect to see wallabies and kangaroos and euros, and I also expect to see good bird life. And even though it's wintertime, I would expect to see some snakes, although, again, given it's fairly cool, probably less than I would if I had have done this in a few months' time. And along with that, as I get into the middle and southern section of the trail, a lot of farm animals, particularly as I'm going through a lot of the rural areas.
And what about plant life? What are you expecting to see on the plant side?
Certainly in the northern section, it is very much, I don't know whether there's spinifex there or not, I would expect so, but it is very much arid heathland, so not a lot of trees. Now, the trailhead itself, from memory, in Indigenous language means place of peppermint willows, so gum trees, and that means I hadn't expected to see lots of trees in that area, but by the sound of it, there will be some there at least. Going down onto the southern end of the trail as I get towards the southern part, the cliffs, a lot of coastal heathland, and then again through the outskirts of Adelaide. So I do skirt past the outskirts of Adelaide through the Barossa and that sort of area. Yes, there will be wineries and a lot of farmland. People-wise, I would expect there seems to be a lot of people on the trail at the moment, both going north and south. So, it seems to be at least once every week there are people leaving, if not more often, and there are people travelling in both directions. So I would expect to either have people overtake me or I'll overtake them, depending on how fast they're moving and when they actually left. And I also expect to have people coming from the south heading north. So I would expect to see them. Now, unless we skip each other in town because we've stayed at different places and we happen to miss as we go past, but I would expect to see a number of people there. And in talking to the Neil Hendry and the Heysen Trail, friends of the Heysen Trail, they're running a series of through hikes. So I would expect to see organised groups doing sections of the Heysen Trail as well.
Right, okay.
Now, I did mention temperature early in this podcast. One thing that's done for me is over the past 10 years, my gear that I've carried with me has pretty much catered for hot temperatures as far as you can do, down to about -7. And after having done the Great Southwest Walk in Victoria a couple of months ago, I went with a lighter weight sleeping bag that actually will take me down to 2 degrees Celsius. And given that the minimum temperatures I'd be looking at around about 4 degrees, I think that sleeping bag will suit me well. Whereas normally I would have taken a sleeping bag that did me down to -8, but that's just extra bulk, not a huge amount of weight, but extra bulk in the pack. I'm also going through and leaving my down jacket at home, and this is the first. As I said, I've always catered for -7, so I normally wear a very lightweight long sleeve top. I have a rain jacket is normally the second thing to go on if I'm starting to get cool, and I don't tend to ever wear my long sleeve thicker thermal top. So what I'll end up doing is if I do get cold, I'll have 3 layers rather than the 4 layers, which I never ever use anyway.
So the down jacket would be the 4th layer.
Down jacket's the 4th layer.
Well, the 3rd layer under the rain jacket, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and typically if it putting on a jacket that's non-breathable means that if it is cool, it's going to keep me warm. But if it's raining, it'll go on. If it's not raining, I'll tend to put the down jacket on. But it's not unusual for me to start off in the morning with that jacket on, and 10 or 15 minutes I've stopped to take it off because it's getting hot. So it's a risk, but I will be, unless it gets to -5 or -6, I'll be fine.
Well, then you just keep moving, don't you?
Yeah, and I will keep moving it faster.
Or if you're sleeping, you put everything on that you own.
Personal fitness-wise, I ended up doing the Great Southwest Walk as a test walk to see if I'd be capable of doing that. So that was around about just on 260 kilometres, and my hip replacement coped really well with that. I came out feeling quite fit, and I'd lost just on 5.9 kilos in 2 weeks, which is what I would expect.
And that was to some extent quite a difficult walk, particularly along the beach sections, because it was hard going, deep sand and very soft sand. So I'm not sure what kind of tread that you're going to find. You're probably not going to have as softer surface maybe to walk through on this one.
Well, looking at the photos and the images, I've also got a friend that does ultra marathons, 200 kilometre marathons, and it looks like sections of it look like the Larapinta Trail with all those little rocks all over the trail. But there are some where it's just dirt roads running through rural areas or walking across grassy areas. So I don't expect to see a lot of built and constructed stairways and mesh like a lot of the other tracks have, but I could be wrong. So it'll be interesting to see how that looks and how that goes through there. Weight-wise, I'm carrying probably 12 kilos more than I would have liked when I start a walk. Normally, I prefer to start a walk on 98 kilos. I'm currently just on 110. However, having said that, yes, I am carrying more body fat than I want to, but I'm also carrying more muscle. Now, one of the concerns from my perspective is, without fail, I lose just on 3 kilos a week every week that I hike. So when I did the Bibbulmun track, I started off at 98 kilos. 5 weeks later, I was down to 85 kilos. I'd lost 13 kilos. So not quite 3 kilos, but it was getting there. In this case here, I'm doing a 7 to 8 week hike, and if it ends up being 8 weeks, that's potentially 24 kilos. So if I do lose 24 kilos, that takes me down to 86 kilos, which is probably about as low as I ever want to go. So God knows what would happen if I do a 4-month-long hike. And this also includes when I stop in towns, I eat a lot of food. So, I probably eat 2 days worth of food each day that I'm actually staying there. But again, I wear that off pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think the thing about this though is that as you're, losing so much weight, you have to make sure that you're not losing it all as muscle as well. So, there's a bit of sort of lifting and squatting exercise to do along the way rather than just walking.
Well, funnily enough, most of the weight that I lose weight from all over my whole body, but I end up building up a lot of muscle on my legs from the walking. It's the upper body. And it's noticeable when I come back and go to the gym after a long hike, I just don't have the upper body strength than I did when I started the track. I will be focusing on doing upper body exercises just on a daily basis to keep that upper body strength. As far as fitness is concerned, I tend to hit peak fitness around about week 3, week 4 in, and that's when I get a good run at it. So while I haven't planned on doing any 40-kilometre days, I'll play it by ear, and if I can combine some days together, but I'll do it because I'm feeling really fit and the conditions allow, rather than trying to push myself too hard. Food carries and food, I will be carrying an average of 620 grams of food a day. And it's really strange that, when you think about it, that means 10 days, it's 6,150 grams, but they don't end up being equally on each day. Because day one for me on each food drop that I pick up will end up being a jar of peanut butter, which is 470 grams. So that day one food pack tends to be heavy because of that. But again, it's the average amount of food that I'm carrying.
And it's an interesting one because, if we go back to Bibbulmun or even any of the other multi-week hikes that we've done, that 615 grams is actually much lower than it was on previous hikes. And so we've refined it down to the point that, sometimes you bring home a lot of food, and we've refined it down so that almost at the end of a restock, there's not a lot left.
No, and with the Bibbulmun, what I ended up doing there was I put together food that I thought that I would eat. When it came time to pick up my next food drop, what I hadn't eaten, rather than throwing it out or giving it away or leaving it, I sent it back home just so I could say, well, this is how much food I had left over. This is what I should be carrying. And that's put me up with an amount of 615-ish grams per day. Now, one of the problems I tend to have is doing excessive exercise, I lose appetite. And there is actually a condition that normally affects Olympic athletes and high-performing athletes, and I don't claim to be that.
But you're certainly not that at the moment, Tim.
But I think, given the amount of exercise I'm doing, on my biggest days on the Bibbulmun track, I was burning up to 8,000 calories. I think I estimated on the Great Southwest Walk, I was burning around about 5,500 calories per day. So, and I think I'm only carrying around about 2,900 calories per day. So there's definitely a discrepancy there of what I'm eating.
Yeah, that's right.
The last logistical consideration I think it's worthwhile mentioning is navigation. For this hike, I'll be using the Far Out app on my phone. I'm pretty happy with that when I've used it in the past, and it's got some really good features that talk about or can locate you on the map and how far you've got to go to your campsite, as well as how far you've come from your previous one. So it provides some good information. People can go through and talk about water supplies or any issues on trail in real time, so it's quite handy in that respect. I will also be carrying a compass, and I've got the set of trail maps. Now, it's been a long time since I've used a compass on a hike. Usually I don't have an issue as such, but it's there just in case my technology goes down. And having said that, the signage on this trail, from what I can see, is pretty well done. So as long as I'm not off with the fairies and not paying attention, I should be able to work out where I'm going and which direction I'm supposed to be heading. So not just relying on one form of navigation, although, as I said, Far Out Guide will be my main option.
So we just talked through all of the sort of logistics and, the getting there and the planning and, what you might experience and the what you might be carrying and all of those sorts of things. But how are you feeling about this? How ready do you feel for this 1,200 kilometre walk?
Two answers there. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm probably looking forward to this as a hike more so than I have done in a number of years. So I think that I really am. When I originally planned on doing this walk in 2021, I based my logistics on what happened on the Bibbulmun 3 years earlier, and I'd planned to do this walk in 42 days. This time I've allowed 52 days, so it's giving me the extra time. And because I'm now doing AustralianHiker full-time, I obviously can't spend another 6 weeks doing this, but I've got the flexibility to be able to go through. If it takes me a few days longer or a few days less, I've got that ability to be flexible. Fitness-wise, I think I'll be fine because I am not doing huge days. Doing distances around about, on average, 23 kilometres should be fine. By the time I hit day 11, I would have lost 3 or 4 kilos. I would have picked up some fitness. That will be a long day, and that'll be a day where I start probably at 6 o'clock in the morning and probably continue through. If I'm doing 3.5 kilometres per hour, as an example, that's going to go through and take me 8 hours. So if I leave camp at, say, 6:30 in the morning, I'm going to get into camp around about 8.5 hours later. So I in most cases, apart from that one day in particular, I shouldn't have too much problem. It shouldn't be too much of a stress. I think I'm physically, as much as I would have liked to have been lighter, that was a bit of a contradiction there. If I was at 98 kilos, I was really concerned what would happen if I lost 24 kilos
that's
from
right.
that point. That would have been, I physically could not have coped with that. I would have ended up with about 1% body fat, and people don't perform very well for long periods when they look like that. So I think carrying the extra weight, it'll make it a bit harder to start with, but 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, I'll be back down to a good weight, and I'll be moving faster as I go.
So what about in your head, mentally? How are you feeling mentally about this?
Mentally, I'm feeling fine, actually. As I said, I suppose there's still a lot to do before I go.
Yeah. I keep thinking that every time I walk through the lounge room, Tim. Oh, my God, look at this mess.
So my last food that I've ordered should be here in the next day or two. I do need to actually send my first food drop-off in the next 2 days to make sure it gets to Wilpena Pound on time. And I've got enough food to be able to go through and do that because it's I've only food carries vary. My first food carry really is only about 4 days, 5 days. My biggest food carry is 10 days. And I did manage to do a 12-day food carry on the Great Southwest Walk. I would have preferred not to, but just the way it ended up being. And certainly most of the time I'm only carrying 7 days worth of food at the worst. So mentally wise, looking forward to it. As I said, a lot to do before I go. There's a lot to put in place. I have gone through and changed. I've got a new phone, which I only got a couple of weeks ago. I've got a new iPad mini, which is what I use for doing podcasting. And there's a lot of templates I need to transfer over and get set up so I don't have to sit there and do that on trail. It's much easier being able to do it either in Canberra or in Adelaide or in Port Augusta and be able to just go through and fill in the blanks or fill in the gaps as I go. So I am definitely looking forward to it. So mentally I think I'm fine.
So what's the hardest day of a hike for you? Which day is that?
Usually I'd say day 2. Now, this one's going to be different. The reason I say day 2, on the Bibbulmun track, my first day, I ended up doing more. I ended up double hutting it. Wasn't planned, but just ended up happening because of the way things were going. I ended up doing 38 kilometres on my first day. I was probably the fittest I've ever been hiking-wise at the start of that walk because I had nothing really to compare it to. So I did, I was doing huge amounts of training and weightlifting and everything beforehand. In this case here, day 1 is 500 metres. So, yes, I'll say day 2 is probably going to be harder. It might be day 3.
So day 1 is 500 metres, day 2 is 18 kilometres. So how long is day 3?
Day 3 is 25.1 kilometres, and then day 4 is 22.7 kilometres. And then at the end of day 4, I've hit Wilpena Pound. So I do actually have a day off fairly early.
Yeah.
If I skipped Wilpena Pound, I would my next day off or my next time I hit a town is on day 12. So it was just too long a gap to have in between.
Yeah, that's right. I'm betting that your day 2 is going to be day 3.
Yeah, I think so, 25.1 kilometres. So I'll see what happens on that one.
So I'll be following you along. I'll be watching you on the map. Every now and then I'll see if I can send you a text message to say you should have turned left instead of right, which is something that I sometimes do. So it'll be an interesting experience. I know everybody that I work with keeps asking me when you're on a hike where you are now, and they love seeing you moving along. So you're going to make the link available to everybody?
Yeah, so I'll actually have 2 satellite communicators, one which I'm testing out and my Garmin InReach. The Garmin InReach I'm used to using, so I don't have to think about what I'm doing. I'll share that link at the start of the morning that I have my 500-metre walk. So nothing's really going to happen until late in the afternoon. And even then, 500 metres.
Watch it. It's all done.
Yeah, it's all done. So, all you're going to see is a dot on the first day. It's really that day when I head off you'll start noticing moving. So I'll put that on social media, and I'll also put a link in the the journeys post, which I do on the website, so people can go through and look at that. I have had people ask me before that how comfortable or how safe do I feel doing that? And I suppose my answer there is, as a large male, I feel reasonably safe. In all honesty, if people want to go through and mug you, there's easier targets in the city than there are in the middle of the bush. So people can follow me along, and it's a chance that if other people are on trail and they can see they're approaching me, and I have had that on previous trips where people have said hello, that they've known that have been coming up towards me. So
yeah, and that's a bit of a surprise because you kind of get creeped out at first, and then you realise, well, you actually gave everybody the link, so that's how they know where you are.
I must admit, the only time that I have ever felt a bit tentative on trail was on the Bibbulmun track, and strangely enough, it was a husband, wife, and young child. And the questions they were asking were really specific.
Really detailed, really, and persistent.
Yeah. Are you travelling with someone else? Are you meeting with somebody? Where are you staying tonight? So if you want to creep someone out, they're the questions you ask.
Too much detail.
Yeah. So, but I do find that people like to see how I'm going, and I know. It's Jill can see, depending on how far the dots are apart, how fast I'm moving. So that'll be there and available for anyone that feels like they want to go through and follow. Okay, that's all for this week's episode. We hope you've enjoyed. And if you're interested in the Heysen Trail, the next episode will be released in 2 weeks' time from Wilpena Pound in South Australia. And I will try as best I can to release the episodes on the normal day, but as I said, it really is going to depend. I mean, I've got some days where I've got 7 or 8 days between towns. Other days are a bit longer than that. Other days are shorter. But I'm trying to do a podcast on a weekly basis. I'll be going through and talking about my week and how I've gone and what I've seen. And I'll also try and focus on one particular aspect, like infrastructure and water and animals and birds on each of those episodes. I've still got to work out what I'm going to be doing and when I'm going to be talking about each of those things. Okay, that's all for this week's episode. Bye for now.
And bye from me.